I'm Adam Walsh, host and producer of The Signal. It's been 3/4 of a century since what is now Newfoundland and Labrador joined Canada. Marking the anniversary, the provincial government has a slew of stuff planned for throughout this year. Community celebrations, special license plates, and cultural projects. Today, here, we are having a conversation I'm calling Confederation 75. I have a panel of younger folks to talk about how Confederation's history impacts us today, about some lessons learned, and also they're going to take a look ahead at what's to come and what they hope is to come. Joining me here in studio, we've got Christina Ennis, Draco Dunphy, Cassandra Drodge, and Lauren Slade. How y'all doing?
Excellent.
Great. Fabulous.
Christina, we'll whip around. Give us just the Coles notes of who each of you are, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So my name's Christina Ennis. I'm from St. John's here in Newfoundland and Labrador. My family's actually from Maraschino Island in Placentia Bay, but I'm sure we'll get into it. We do not live there anymore, unfortunately. I work in business development and HR, and I'm super active in the community, and I'm super happy to be here.
Draco.
Yeah, my name is Draco. I grew up in Harbour, Maine, formerly known as Rogues Roost at one point in time. Grew up down by the water with strong Irish and a Mi'kmaq background. Currently finishing up my undergrad at university and studying linguistics, business, sustainable rural development, and public policy.
Cassandra.
My name is Cassandra Drodge, pronouns she and her. I am from a mixed-race background, so my mom comes from St. John's, specifically the Battery. I have a fishing family from that side, and my dad comes from Clarendon, Jamaica. And I specialize in research and community building, specifically ground-up solutions and sustainability. And I'm also co-chair of the Social Justice Co-op of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Lauren.
My name is Lauren Slade. I am a fourth-year communications and sociology student at Memorial University, focusing on corrections and the rights of inmates, and I am from Mount Pearl.
Excellent. I'm glad we've got the Pearl represented here today. That was very important for this conversation. The most important thing.
Of course,
I grew up partly in Mount Pearl. In the lead up to today, right, or even this year, how much time in your ecosystems or in your universes have you spent thinking about Confederation and whether it's you or your friends and folks around you? Draco, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, just this weekend I was at a gathering in central Newfoundland, and completely unrelated to this, didn't bring it up at all. Confederation was brought up by 3 different people. And I find it funny because I think about Confederation quite often, and in home I find a lot of youth talk about whether it's at a kitchen table or at a party. You might not believe it, but it's like when people complain about politics and the state of things, people complain about Confederation as well, I find.
So still, even with younger folks like yourself, you're still hearing that
I almost
question.
find it's quite stronger now these days in these last couple of years than it has been when I was younger, but even in high school it was quite a topic.
Who else?
I've only thought about it really recently since seeing those snazzy new license plates.
Yeah. Right.
Honestly, that's what kind of like sparked me thinking about it, is like that visual representation.
So the license plates come out, you start thinking about it, so what comes to mind about it?
How we've somehow come so far, yet not at all, in a way.
Okay, what do you mean?
I think we're still having the same conversations about social inequity and access to housing, access to healthcare, and how we're still having these discussions of missing pieces, basically.
Cassie.
Well, for me, Confederation has often been brought up, especially being part of a fishing family and being really close with my great-grandfather, who was a fisher since he was 7 up until he lost his license during the cod moratorium. So I think in my own family, the choice to join Canada was often framed as a group decision solely based on the need for stability and the need for good jobs, good healthcare, good housing. But I think that my family feels like it was kind of like a whiplash moment because they, in their mind, thought that they were going to receive this stability that would take care of them, but in reality, they lost their license to fish, and so all those good jobs kind of went away, and they got government jobs. My great-grandfather retired, so yeah.
Christina?
Yeah, so I feel like initially, before I started talking to some of my friends and family about Confederation over the last couple of days, I feel like I would have said I don't think about it very often. However, in comparison to a lot of my peers, I think about it much more often than a lot of other people. And I think a lot of it is because my family is from a resettled community, and it's something we talk about a lot. But we also go back there very frequently. Maraschino Island was the first resettled community to have a reunion, which is pretty cool, and it's still something that happens to this day. But going back to what Lauren said about the similar issues, a lot of my friends, when I said, do you know anything about Confederation? What do you think about it? They say, I have no opinion. I just know it occurred. And then I'd say, okay, what do you think are the greatest issues facing our generation kind of going forward? And without even knowing kind of what the scenario was at the time, they absolutely connected those dots as well. And in a lot of the reading and research I've done the last few days, it's very interesting, the issues that have permeated generations.
In the lead-up to today, I spoke with Memorial University history professor Sean Cadigan. So throughout the course of the hour, I've got 3 different clips to play. And this first one, it's a bit of context, so it touches on a lot of what we're kind of touching on right now. So let's give this a listen, and then I'll ask y'all what you think about it.
There was tremendous social and economic inequality in Newfoundland in the 1930s. There'd always been tremendous social and economic inequality. Most people are familiar with the divisions between, say, fish merchants and fishers in outports, right? The fishing industry always had trouble providing incomes that would support, profitable businesses for most merchants and good incomes for the fishers who dealt with them. And thus we had the truck system and all the conditions that went along with it, terrible exploitation and so on. In the St. John's area, the economic conditions were better. There was more employment, but a lot of that employment rested on 2 things. Railway development, which was very expensive and had proved to be a huge drain on the Dominion's coffers without ever really providing us with a railway industry that was self-supporting. It was always a drain on the public. And then there was protected manufacturing, the belief that we could build a manufacturing base by protecting the local market against cheaper imports from outside the province. The problem with that is that putting tariffs on imported goods meant that you were increasing the cost of living for most rural people who were already finding it hard to make good livelihoods in the fishing industry. Now, there were bright spots, particularly in the pulp and paper sector, in paper making and so on, but still there were an awful lot of people who depended directly on the fishery, and there was an awful lot of economic distress in the context of the very low prices and poor international economic conditions of the 30s. So that's the general context. So there's a lot of economic uncertainty and distress everywhere. And so this translates into all kinds of social problems, lack of access for many people to good medical care, poor housing in the St. John's area for working class people. There were all kinds of social problems, many of them that would be familiar to people today.
Memorial University history professor Sean Cadigan there. Anything jump out at us from that, the couple of minutes of context from Professor Cadigan?
That we're having the exact same conversations now in 2024 that we were having in 1930. Particularly what sticks out to me is the discussion around housing and people being homeless. We are seemingly more concerned with finding physical space for these people rather than addressing the socioeconomic components and barriers that lead people to that in the first place.
Anyone else on that?
The tariffs comment that he made, I learned yesterday as well that when we joined Canada, a lot of Newfoundland's free trade agreements disappeared. virtually kind of overnight. And the cost of goods getting to the island it increased kind of immediately, and we couldn't do anything about it. And that disproportionately affected Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly rural areas, in comparison to the rest of Canada. And given our geography and our previous link to Britain and, the trade routes through shipping and things like that versus rail was very, very different. And so, yes, a lot of people were very much lifted out of poverty at the time, but costs very much went up as well.
Yeah, things are complex, right? And then you look at today, what do we talk about a lot? Cost of living. We talk about food security. Again, these echoes are these...
Access to the province.
Yeah, right, access.
Affordable access.
Yeah. And I think we still see like a huge parallel between this idea of economic uncertainty and risk management, especially when we look at the fishing industry, right? Like we still have protests almost every April that focus directly on like these unfair prices. And I think in 2020, I think Keith Sullivan was up there at the Confederation building comparing this to mercantile times, the trucking system, basically highlighting this idea that, folks here, they've never had control of their fish. And I'd also like to add that, settler folks have not had, access to full control of their fish, and Indigenous people have it even worse, even further, inability to access these things. And so I think right now in 2024, we're still looking at how to be able to value our fish, how to export it, how to keep our licenses here, and how to pass them down generationally. It's getting harder and harder to finance your own license because of the cost of boats, because of the cost of fish, and not necessarily having those things equate out to like a profit or even something that's able to sustain like your business, whether you're like small scale or large scale fisher. So I still feel like there's strife between federal, provincial governments and fishing communities, specifically rural communities. There definitely is room for more environmental tools that can be used, especially by local fishers, to be able to mitigate like uncertain market costs, right, for fish quotas and stuff. So I guess I'll stop there, but I see a lot of problems, but I also see a lot of solutions.
All right, and we can work towards some of these solutions too. And with the look at Draco, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the one thing I feel very strongly that Confederation did well was doing away with the truck system. I know in my own family personally, I believe it was my fourth great grandfather died on a fishing trip, and the merchant extorted my family, the widow, for a huge amount of land over one single barrel of meat. Right. That doesn't seem reasonable at all, but that was the way the truck system worked. So that's the one thing I'm most pleased with. But at the same time, I echo these sentiments. We're dealing with a lot of the same problems. It seems that every April, just on the way here, we were listening to fish harvesters and listening to that on the radio. But at the same time, when I look at it, we're dealing with the same problems, but we don't have the same self-determination now. We don't have the rights to control our own fisheries. We don't have those rights. And I don't think in Canada we can, really. We have 7 seats out of 338 seats in the House of Commons. The number of seats required to have your own political party is 15 to be recognized and to be given funds to advocate for yourself. And that just doesn't seem right to me. I don't think we're on equal footing in this matter. And I almost feel like we're worse off. And that's a sad thing. With respect to a lot of the things that came after Confederation, well, everyone got those. Now, will we have the same degree? I'm not sure. But we would have improved in education almost certainly. We would have improved in healthcare almost certainly. But at the same time, I don't feel very strongly that we've gone in a good direction.
I'm Adam Walsh, host and producer of The Signal. You're listening to Confederation 75. It's a conversation about Confederation's history, its impacts on us today, some lessons we've learned, and a look ahead at what's to come and what we hope is to come. I've got another clip from Professor Cadigan. So again, history professor with Memorial University. And here is Professor Cadigan talking about a look at today. And again, this touches on exactly what we're talking about.
Now, there are, of course, tremendous, there are huge differences in many perspectives on what the problems are that need to be addressed. I expect that today, environmental concerns are acute. We have lots of concerns related to the relationship between energy production, global warming, for example. So those are huge issues. But there are also much different perspectives now on what are the origins of social problems and economic problems that confront the peoples of the province. And so I think in 2024, we probably don't really think about Newfoundlanders anymore. We know that there are diverse peoples who live within the political boundaries of the province, who've often had very problematic relationships with each other and with the federal government. We have the relationship between settlers and Indigenous peoples. We have all of the relationships between what we now think of as a very diverse set of communities that we try to be more inclusive about, but are peoples who all have different types of social and economic needs that need to be met. And many people feel probably aren't yet being met very well. And so those are far more vocal and articulate things than might have existed in the 1940s. Not to say that these issues weren't there, but they weren't being articulated particularly well. Classic example is that in the late 1940s, you mightn't find so many people talking about the particular concerns of rural women over the nature of social and economic development in their communities. Who's going to provide good health care to people? Who's going to provide schooling for children? And so on. So there were, in other words, important gender differences in how people might have thought about what was necessary and what would be brought by Canada to Newfoundland and Labrador as a province. I think now people are much more aware of these differences and they're articulated better. So I think 75 years later, it's a much more complicated environment in which people are much better advocates for what they need themselves. And so this is no longer simply a question of what a province gets from the federal arrangement, but it's about what diverse peoples living within the geopolitical borders of that province get from the negotiations between that province and the federal government. So it's a more complicated world now.
Any thoughts there on what Professor Sean Cadigan had to say, the history prof, right? Because the last bit, it's a really more complicated world, right? True. But what are your thoughts on what he was saying? Go ahead.
Can I kick us off with a quote?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we started talking about how the issues that were then kind of permeated generations, and we're still seeing very similar issues now. And it's very interesting. Frank Moore said this in 1979. That was 45 years ago. And that was 30 years into Confederation. He said there are whole new areas of social concern, unforeseen or deemed irrelevant 45 years ago. And that's literally extremely relevant and accurate even now. And it's like the same issues, they're just kind of modernized. And there's a layer of technology or mobility or,
And we have words for it.
We have words for it.
Whereas before, we didn't have words for the things that were going on. So we just, I feel like, brushed them off to the side.
Yeah, we have words for it, and there's hopefully more folks listening. There's more folks feeling that they can actually have a voice now, right? But still really complicated. The issues are still around. Climate change, right? Cost of living. It's everything that we're facing can feel like it's a whole lot some days. Cassie, what do you think?
We're dealing with climate change and rural development. And also like community development because, it's not news to us that we have seen out-migration of our own locals as well as like kind of an influx of migration of folks since probably like around 2012. But of course, like way before then, but just felt like kind of like a wave there. And it just keeps getting better and bigger, which is great. And I think, like there's two parts to this. There's, community building, and then there's like providing good jobs in a place that has predominantly relied on oil and gas, which becomes really complicated. So I guess, on one side, we want to ensure that we include folks that are here and that we are able to facilitate a pathway for like diversity and equity and also employment pathways for newcomers. But we also want to make sure that we have like responsible industries so that we can fall on them. And I think responsible industries is something new to the game. And it's something that I think echoes a lot, especially in the fishing industry and even the oil and gas industry, right? But I think responsible means quite different in those two avenues. And I would just like to bring up my cooperative background because I am mentoring a fishing cooperative with Kimberly Oren down there in Petty Harbor Fishing for Success. And it's the Women's Fishing and Cultural Co-op. So basically it will help establish, obviously, small-scale fishing ventures with the opportunity for women and newcomers to facilitate fishing skills and to hopefully employ them through various means of fishing, from every part to being on the land, to being on the boat, all the way back to processing and creating sustainable goods from that. So I guess from that model, we're looking at including folks from all walks of life. We are creating small-scale natural resource endeavors. So we're not doing that large-scale, like pretty common. When large-scale things happen, big mistakes can happen. And so when we're doing it small-scale, we're able to kind of take our time as well as take notes on what works and what doesn't. And we're also able to help facilitate people to stay here, not only in St. John's, but in other rural communities, anywhere that has like a fishing port. So it's not only that sustainable job piece, it's also like getting someone their PR, like their citizenship, because a lot of people come here and they like can't stay here because they can't find a good job or, they don't feel like they can survive in St. John's because rent is like $2,000.
Rent's too high, and if you go outside of that overpass there, then it's a conversation A about employment, B about transportation, you name it. But Cassie, what you're touching on too there, it's going back to the clip we just played with Professor Cadigan talking about like Newfoundlander and people identifying. But what you're touching on, it's that building, maintaining, saving, building on culture that from a Newfoundlander to a Newfoundlander and Labradorian to just anyone living in the lands that you can call Newfoundland and Labrador, it is some of that, I guess, shared culture that gets built, which is what
That's
you're
right.
kind of pointing to.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it becomes even more fascinating because, as we know, Fishing for Success, already down in Petty Harbor, owned by Kimberly, is it's a social enterprise. And the whole purpose of that is to be able to highlight the interconnectedness between not only like settler ways of fishing, because cod jigging is a European settler way of fishing. It's to connect those methods with other cultures, other places around the world. So when we get people in from MyTac or people just coming in to visit and just who want to learn how to like cod jig on like a Saturday, you start to learn like different parts of the fish and how they're used. And just recently we started thinking about like drying out cod skins to give to our dogs and cats for treats, and that was just like a collaborative conversation between me and a couple of other folks, including Kimberly. And I think the heart of this is really just highlighting that Newfoundland traditional fishing culture, as well as being able to facilitate, because integrate is not the word. Like, we don't want to force people to be a certain way, to look a certain way, to act a certain way. We want to be able to facilitate a pathway where they feel like, this is my home. Like, I'm a Newfoundlander and I'm also like from India, or like myself, I'm a Newfoundlander. I'm also Jamaican. I'm Black, I'm mixed, and that's okay.
Yeah, we're allowed to be complex. We can have different parts.
Exactly.
Draco, any thoughts?
Well, yeah, on the environmental piece, I just think back to the cod moratorium and the things that led up to that. And, this is where I talk about the systemically disempowered. Like, I feel like a lot of youth, a lot of people I talk to feel systemically disempowered within Canada. And, I recognize that at the time, the DFO were commenting that, yeah, the fish were fine. While while people working on the trawlers, while the inshore fishermen were all saying, yeah, no, we have a huge problem.
Yeah.
Reverend Moses Harvey was saying we had a problem in the fishery in the 1800s when he served as the secretary for the Fisheries Committee. So, I mean, I look at that and think, you know, we're in a place where now there are political considerations for that many more voters, that many more seats in Parliament that aren't a part of us. We're having decisions made about us without us. And, you know, and it's funny, too, talking about Indigenous people, because we were on the table in Confederation, but we weren't at the table.
Yeah.
And that's something that should never happen. And we see from that, you know, Churchill Falls. We see Muskrat Falls. We see all the consequences of us not being at the table about decisions made about the land without consent of Indigenous peoples. So I find it very funny, and it's similar. I see aspects of cultural degradation and rootlessness, that is, to be without roots, that comes from Confederation. You know, you see people talking about the issues of the culture being lost, the language being lost, the way we spoke being lost. But I also look at the fact that, you know, one of the things that we were talking about in the lead up to this conversation here today was the lack of vision on the part of government. That was part of the greater clip from Dr. Cadigan. And, you know, I see that every day in the sense that, well, we continue to build suburbs in the places where young people would fish, in the places where young people will go pick mussels, in the place where young people will go pick berries, in the place where young people will go drive their quads or go for a walk. And we take away a lot of these great things about Newfoundland and Labrador and wonder why young people leave. This is something in terms of the environmental aspect. I almost feel like for youth, we're in a government right now where a lot of us don't feel like we have that much say. I mean, I look at the numbers of the last election. We had 178,000 people vote out of 368,000. That's less than half the electorate are voting. That's not something that's a sign of a healthy democracy or a healthy society. This is very concerning for me.
From what some of the comments you're making, I'm also thinking about reconciliation, right? There's lots of talk about reconciliation. What do you think around action and what's happening with it?
Well, I mean, I look at something that happened as a direct result of Confederation. In the Labrador schools on the coast, Inuktitut used to be the language of instruction, but as a direct result of Confederation in 1949, without any prior consideration or consultation of the Inuit, the language of instruction was suddenly and abruptly switched to English. By changing that caused problems that echoed out throughout history now, where we see that Inuktitut is critically endangered. So in terms of that, I work as a language research specialist with First Life Friendship Center. And one of the things that coming across in my research is just all the talk about, well, we should be training this. In March 2019, the House of Commons or House of Assembly records, there's talk, a motion or question time saying that we should be training Innu Amun translators and Inuktitut translators, but I haven't seen that work happen. And that was in 2019, the International Year of Indigenous Languages. Now we're in 2022, 2032, the International Decade for Indigenous Languages, and I'm still not seeing that work happen despite commitments. Memorial University, for instance, is committed to implementing degree and diploma programs in Indigenous languages, but I'm not seeing the momentum there.
Yes, when we talk about reconciliation, you want to see action, and you're not seeing it from your
I'm not seeing the reconciliation. There's no action in this.
There you go.
And I find it very sad because, I mean, 2011, Khalibu was formed as a band. It's a landless band. Currently, the Innu are still in the process of negotiating their land claims agreement. A lot of the problems that happened in and because of 1949 are still being felt today, are still being worked on today, and with no great pace, with no great haste.
There's a lot of challenges, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about building community, but we're talking about folks feeling like they're not connected to things, or lack of inaction around reconciliation. What else do we think about challenges that we need to try to overcome, and how do we start to push towards overcoming them?
There was, of course, some good things that came out of Confederation. The baby bonus was the first time that a lot of women had access to their own funds. For the first time in their lives, they had money that they got to choose, ideally, what to do with. However, when we look at the state of things now and how decisions are made, there's still a lot of decisions that our current government federal, provincial, local governments in some cases perhaps, where women are disproportionately affected by the decisions that are made. The province introduced GBA Plus into their decision-making process, gender-based analysis. So as an inclusion effort, it's supposed to be analyzed for all decisions that are being made. And if you look at those records, is that GBA Plus analysis being conducted in a meaningful way? And are changes being made as a result of those analyses? I'm not so certain. And an example of that, the cost of living checks, when we had a surprise surplus that one time. Couples received double the money than a single mother. And I grew up with a single mother, and I very much, that was instantly came to my mind when that policy came out, which, sure, it sounded awesome. I'm going to get a couple $100 in my pocket. But then when you kind of look at it, it's like, well, if you're a single mother with 3 children, you're getting $500. The couple next door, who are both employed and have 1 child, getting double the amount of money. Does that seem? Didn't seem such an awesome decision to me.
I think they're like missing the mark on equal versus equitable, where you're giving people like what you think makes sense and what you think is equal, but you haven't actually considered the circumstances.
Exactly.
Right. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Cassandra, thoughts?
I specialize in, sustainability and community development. So I see a lot of similarities here with regards to like needing a strategic plan and everything sounding really great. And businesses wanting to make the shift, but not necessarily knowing how to do that. And I know that Professor Cadigan did mention, energy use and climate change and, oil and gas dependency, I think, is all those things are definitely really relevant to our province. And so I guess with regards to that, there should be more, government strategy to not only bring in very small to medium scale renewable ventures, but to also include like women and Indigenous folks in the decision making and Black people, because we're here too.
I'm Adam Walsh, host and producer of The Signal. You were listening and watching. You were watching and listening to Confederation 75. We are talking about the history of Confederation, the impacts on us today, lessons we've learned from it, and a look ahead at what's to come and what we hope is to come. Joining me here in studio, we've got Christina Ennis, Draco Dunphy, Cassandra Drodge, and Lauren Slade. It's a panel discussion looking at everything I just mentioned. So we have one other clip to play from history professor Sean Cadigan of Memorial University. And it ties into a lot of what's come up organically in this conversation. It's about having a plan.
When we look at the past 20 years, we had a very brief moment in which the offshore oil and gas sector generated a tremendous amount of wealth and revenue in this province. The question was, what do we do with it? And I think that for me it was, where's the plan, right? Where's the plan? And my fear is that the plan locally, and the federal government wasn't much involved in this, it was a much more provincial issue, was probably no more sophisticated than we'll have another big energy development to succeed oil and gas. And that was, hydroelectricity in Muskrat Falls. I'm not sure how that worked out for us, right? So it's the plan for me that's important, right? Is there a plan? Is there a consensus, a process at arriving at a good sort of popular consensus that this is a good plan that works for most people, or is it a plan that works for particular interest groups who represent their interest as if it's everybody's interest? And I think that that's the difficulty of politics generally. So I'm always kind of looking for that plan. I think that that's what people were probably hoping for in the 1940s, that somehow out of Confederation, a clear plan for future development would emerge. I think we're still hoping in 2024 for that plan.
Plan. I mean, there can be lots of plans, right?
Yeah, there can be. I think the first plan is to make sure that we have our post-secondary and trades institutions, as well as other stakeholders involved in like just transition employment and training opportunities for like people here, as well as folks who are coming into the province to be able to facilitate jobs at our home. I think one of the benefits, anyway, this is the first and only time you'll ever hear me say this, so get this good, people. The only benefits of the oil and gas industry ever being here, ever, is the direct and indirect jobs that it gave to rural communities. That's something that I cannot deny. And I've spoken to people on the phone about this throughout the province, or the island specifically. And if we could model something that wasn't as environmentally damaging, and something that would provide jobs directly to people who were trained in that specific field at home in their community, and to be able to bring in other folks to facilitate whatever niches, will not only create a better rapport between folks within that community, but it will also boost like their their internal economy. Restaurants will start seeing more people, hotels will start seeing more people, you'll start seeing like Airbnbs, tourist things being used, you name it, right? So I think we I guess as a province should be putting more pressure on oil and gas industries to make those responsible decisions. And I mean, we have one of the most like amazing like groups of people when it comes to like a province. We are very skilled, we're getting diverse. We like to say that we're really nice and we're friendly. I like to believe that too sometimes. But I think it's just standing up and showing our value and really sticking to it, like Draco said, saying like, this isn't good enough. We need you to do better. So
yeah, it's the difference between people say, well, we're listening, and actually hearing what you have to say and what different communities have to say. Lauren, thoughts?
I think that like plans are obviously a very important part of this conversation, but without action, the plans don't mean anything.
Oh, it's easy to write some. Just there you go, another one for the shelf. Plan 14, shelf 18.
And what's sticking out most for me as somebody who studies corrections is obviously the plan to build a new facility in the metro region. And we've had all these plans made, I think, since 2019. And what do we have to show for it? Nothing. We're shoving more people into that prison that is outdated, rodent infested, and understaffed. So like where is the missing piece there? I don't understand.
In a time when we have a health accord and we talk about the importance of wraparound supports, right? And then you look at HMP and all of the news stories that got done around it, and for everything you just said.
Yeah.
Plan.
One word.
So my thoughts on the plan. Planning isn't always easy. There's big plans, there's little plans. The plan, I think if we were less drinking from a fire hose as a province, literally all of the time, and had a bit more of a cohesive outlook that included analysis and fiscal responsibility around implementing a variety of social programs, and if the government could demonstrate that they're making sound decisions, it would go a long way with trust, even just internally, with the divide that's created constantly by perceived haphazard decisions.
Just looking at Confederation, I know we're talking about the 75th anniversary. I would just want to give a quote from the 50th anniversary that happened in 2009 of the resettlement of some Inuit communities, Newtok and Hebron. It's from Kenny Girarsi. He said, "I'm not celebrating that 50th anniversary of getting kicked out of my hometown, out of my own home." And I just think to myself, we have 6 seats in the Senate of 105. We have 7 seats in the House of Assembly. In the entire history of Canada, there's been one Supreme Court justice, and that happened in 2016. I don't feel like we're on equal terms in Canada, and I don't think that we're going to feel very good until that happens. In whatever way, whether we get some say over our own natural resources to a meaningful way, I think that that's really what it comes down to. But we can't control what the federal government does, but we can control what we do. You know, I think about leadership. I'm in university studying business, and one of the things we look at is, you know, when you've got a good leader, when you've got someone who's fighting for you, with you, that's something you believe in. Performance goes up at that time. I don't think we've had a province that has believed in the government in a long time. You know, I think in 2008, earlier than that, and Danny Williams' years might be the last time we had a pretty unanimous way of saying, hey, I actually believe we're doing something right here. Danny had pretty unreal numbers for a politician. I think high 80s, 90s at the time. But, you know, I think it's time that we have a government that steps up for us.
I think meeting people where they're at is exactly what we need to do and what the provincial government has not done. That's why folks are on their steps and why there's panel discussions and why I emailed Bernard Davis twice and he has not gotten back to me. I hope he hears this because like there's just a a miscommunication and this like discord where we have often been like this us idea, regardless. If you're physically on this rock, you are regarded as a burden in the eyes of the government. And I think a lot of us, we don't agree to that. We have created a new narrative where we see each other's different tools and we use different knowledges, we use different skills, and we use our collaborative efforts and this almost like ability to see each other for not what we're worth, but for how we love each other and how we care for one another. And I think that's what really defines people here. And so I always tell folks this, like traditional knowledge is expert knowledge. We should be in those seats. Seats shouldn't cost $300 to sit in. If you're going to do a provincial forum on community building, just transition, make it accessible. Make sure that you have right people in the room. And if you're looking around, scratching your head, asking questions, you probably don't have everyone there.
All right. We will leave it there for today. That concludes this special showing of the Signal's Confederation 75. Thank you, panelists. And thank you all for watching and all of you for listening. It's been great.